Catherine sat in the quiet corner of Kensington Palace's private library, her hands trembling as she held the sealed envelope that had arrived that morning. The return address bore the logo of a prestigious London laboratory, and she knew immediately what it contained. 3 weeks earlier, she had made the difficult decision to submit DNA samples for testing, following a conversation with an elderly palace staff member who had served Diana for years. The woman, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, had approached Catherine during a private moment after a charity gala. With tears in her eyes, Eleanor had whispered something that would change everything Catherine thought she knew about her late mother-in-law. The secret had been weighing on Eleanor's conscience for over 2 decades, and she felt it was time for the truth to emerge. Catherine's heart pounded as she carefully opened the envelope. The clinical language of the report seemed cold and impersonal, but the results were unmistakable. The DNA comparison showed a maternal connection that shouldn't have existed according to official records. Diana had given birth to another child, a daughter, who had been quietly placed for adoption shortly before her marriage to Charles. The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. She had always felt a strange connection to Diana, beyond what might be expected from marrying into the royal family. People often commented on their similarities, not just in appearance but in their approach to charity work and their natural way with children. Now suddenly those similarities made perfect sense. Catherine's mind raced through the implications. This meant William had a half-sister he had never known about. It meant that George, Charlotte, and Louis had an aunt they had never met. Most shocking of all, it meant that Catherine herself was connected to Diana's bloodline in a way that defied explanation. The DNA results indicated that Catherine shared genetic markers with Diana that could only come from a direct family relationship. As she processed this information, Catherine felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. There was excitement at solving a mystery that had puzzled her for years, but also profound sadness for Diana, who had carried this secret alone. The weight of knowing something so significant about the royal family's history felt overwhelming. She thought about the young woman out there who had no idea of her true heritage. According to Eleanor's account, Diana had been barely 18 when she gave birth to this daughter. The pregnancy had been hidden from the public and even from most of the royal family. Only a trusted few had known, and they had taken a vow of silence that had lasted until now. Catherine wondered what kind of life this unknown daughter had lived. Had she been happy with her adoptive family? Did she ever wonder about her biological parents? The thought that there was someone out there who shared Diana's blood, someone who might have inherited her compassion and strength, filled Catherine with a desperate need to find her. The afternoon sun streamed through the library windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug where Catherine sat. She realized she had been staring at the DNA report for nearly an hour, reading and rereading the technical jargon that confirmed what Eleanor had told her. The evidence was irrefutable, backed by the most advanced genetic testing available. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from William, asking if she wanted to join him for lunch. She stared at the message, knowing that she would have to tell him about this discovery, but unsure how to begin such a conversation. How do you tell your husband that his deceased mother had a secret daughter? How do you explain that the family tree he had known his entire life was incomplete? She carefully folded the DNA report and placed it back in its envelope. This secret had remained hidden for over 25 years, and she knew that revealing it would change everything for the royal family. But Catherine also knew that Diana would have wanted her daughter to know the truth about her heritage. The princess had always valued honesty and authenticity above royal protocol. As Catherine rose from her chair, she made a silent promise to Diana's memory. She would find this daughter, and she would make sure that the truth finally came to light, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. That evening, Catherine found herself pacing the private sitting room she shared with William, the DNA report burning like a secret fire in her mind. She had rehearsed the conversation a dozen different ways, but none of them seemed adequate for such a monumental revelation. When William finally arrived home from his royal duties, he immediately noticed her distressed state. "Catherine, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," William said, loosening his tie as he approached her. His blue eyes, so reminiscent of his mother's, showed genuine concern. Catherine felt her resolve waver as she looked at him, knowing that what she was about to share would shake the very foundation of his understanding about his family. She guided him to the sofa and sat beside him, the envelope trembling in her hands. "William, I need to tell you something about your mother, something that Eleanor Hartwell shared with me, and something I've had confirmed through DNA testing." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet room, every word carried weight. William's expression shifted from concern to confusion, then to a kind of protective alertness that Catherine had seen before when anything concerning Diana was discussed. "What kind of DNA testing? Catherine, what are you talking about?" Taking a deep breath, Catherine began to explain Eleanor's revelation about Diana's secret pregnancy. She watched William's face carefully as she spoke, seeing the disbelief, then shock, then a profound sadness pass across his features. When she handed him the DNA report, his hands shook as he read through the scientific confirmation of what seemed impossible. "A sister," William whispered, the words barely audible. "All these years I've had a sister and I never knew." He set the report aside and buried his face in his hands. Catherine could see his shoulders shaking, and she knew he was thinking about all the years Diana had carried this secret alone, all the pain she must have endured keeping such a significant part of her life hidden. The silence stretched between them as William processed the information. Finally, he looked up at Catherine with tears in his eyes. "She was so young when she had me and Harry. I can't imagine what she went through, being even younger and having to give up a child. The pressure from the royal family, the expectations, the protocols. She must have felt so alone." Catherine reached for his hand, feeling the weight of their shared grief for Diana and excitement about this unknown family member. Eleanor said that Diana never stopped thinking about her daughter. She kept a small locket with a photo from the hospital, hidden away where no one would find it. Diana always hoped that someday she might be able to find her and explain why she had to make such a difficult choice. William stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the palace gardens where Diana used to walk with him and Harry when they were children. "What was her name? Did Eleanor know what Diana called her?" His voice was strained with emotion. "Diana named her Sarah Rose," Catherine replied softly. Rose was Diana's middle name, and Sarah was the name Diana had always loved for a daughter. Eleanor said Diana whispered it to her just once, in a moment of deep sadness during your first birthday party. She was watching you open presents, and suddenly became overwhelmed, thinking about the daughter who wasn't there to celebrate with the family. The revelation about the name seemed to hit William particularly hard. He had never known that Diana had considered naming a daughter Sarah, and the fact that she had chosen to honor her own middle name showed how much this child had meant to her, even in giving her up. "We have to find her," William said, turning back to Catherine with determination replacing the shock in his voice. "Sarah Rose deserves to know who her mother was, and she deserves to know that she has family who wants to know her. But Catherine, this could change everything for the monarchy. When this comes out, and it will come out, it will be front-page news around the world." Catherine nodded, understanding the magnitude of what they were contemplating. "I know it will be complicated, but think about what Diana would want. She spent her life advocating for people who felt abandoned or forgotten. How can we abandon her daughter to a life of not knowing her true heritage?" William returned to the sofa and took Catherine's hands in his. "You're right. Diana would never forgive us if we knew about Sarah Rose and did nothing. But we need to be careful about how we proceed. This young woman, whoever she is now, has a life that doesn't include being a royal. We can't just show up and turn her world upside down without considering what's best for her." As they sat together in the fading light of evening, both Catherine and William felt the weight of responsibility settling on their shoulders. They were now the keepers of Diana's greatest secret, and they held the power to reunite a family that had been separated for over 2 decades. The decision of what to do next would require careful consideration, but one thing was certain. Sarah Rose, Diana's daughter, was no longer lost to history. The following morning brought a flurry of discreet activity within the palace walls. Catherine and William had spent most of the night discussing how to approach the delicate task of finding Sarah Rose without alerting the media or causing disruption to her life. They decided to enlist the help of a private investigator who specialized in confidential family matters and had worked with the royal family before. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell arrived at the palace early, carrying a small wooden box that she had kept hidden for over 25 years. With shaking hands, she presented it to Catherine and William, explaining that Diana had entrusted her with these personal items before her death, making her promise to keep them safe until the right time came to reveal the truth. Inside the box, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, was Diana's private diary from 1980, the year before her engagement to Charles. The pages detailed her emotional struggle with the pregnancy, her fears about the future, and her deep love for the daughter she would have to give up. There were also several photographs taken in secret at the hospital, showing Diana holding a tiny baby with dark hair and eyes that were unmistakably Spencer family features. She was beautiful, Catherine whispered, studying the photographs. The baby bore a striking resemblance to William as an infant, but there was something distinctly feminine and delicate about her features that reminded Catherine of Diana's own childhood pictures. William read passages from the diary aloud, his voice breaking at times as he absorbed his mother's words. Diana had written about the impossible choice she faced, knowing that keeping the baby would mean scandal for the royal family and potentially losing her chance to marry Charles. But she had also written about her dreams for her daughter's future, hoping that her adoptive family would love her and give her opportunities that Diana herself had never had. The diary contained one crucial piece of information that would help in their search. Diana had written the name of the adoption agency and the approximate location where her daughter had been placed. She had also mentioned that the adoptive family was well-educated and financially stable, with no children of their own who desperately wanted a daughter. Catherine contacted the private investigator, Mr. James Morrison, who had helped trace family histories for several royal cousins in the past. Morrison was known for his discretion and his ability to uncover information without drawing attention to his clients. When he arrived at the palace that afternoon, Catherine and William explained the situation, emphasizing the need for absolute confidentiality. Morrison studied the documents and photographs with professional interest, making notes about the details that would help him begin his search. The adoption records from that era are more accessible than recent ones, he explained. Many agencies kept detailed files, and some adoptive families were open about maintaining contact with birth families. However, given the high-profile nature of this case, there may have been special arrangements made to ensure privacy. He estimated that the search could take anywhere from a few weeks to several months, depending on how well the records had been preserved and whether Sarah Rose had ever attempted to search for her birth family herself. Morrison also warned them that they needed to be prepared for any outcome, including the possibility that Sarah Rose might not want contact with her biological family. While Morrison began his investigation, Catherine found herself constantly thinking about Sarah Rose and wondering what kind of person she had become. Was she married? Did she have children? Had she inherited Diana's passion for helping others, or had she chosen a completely different path in life? The uncertainty was both exciting and nerve-wracking. William struggled with his own emotions about having a sister he had never known. He found himself analyzing childhood memories, wondering if Diana had ever seemed sad or distracted during family moments, thinking about the daughter who wasn't there. He also felt a deep anger toward the royal institution that had forced Diana to make such an impossible choice when she was barely more than a teenager herself. As the days passed, Catherine noticed changes in both herself and William. They were both more protective of their own children, more aware of how precious family connections were. They also began to understand Diana's advocacy work in a new light, recognizing that her passion for helping abandoned children might have been partially driven by her own experience of having to abandon her first daughter. Eleanor Hartwell visited again, bringing more memories and details about Diana's state of mind during that difficult period. She revealed that Diana had sometimes stood at her bedroom window late at night, looking toward the north where she believed her daughter was living, and whispering birthday wishes on the anniversary of Sarah Rose's birth. The weight of keeping such a significant secret began to take its toll on Catherine. She found herself distracted during public appearances, her mind constantly returning to the search for Sarah Rose. She knew that other members of the royal family would eventually need to be told, but she and William had agreed to wait until they had more information before involving anyone else. By the end of the second week, Morrison called with his first significant update. He had located the adoption agency and confirmed that records from that period still existed. He had also identified 3 possible matches for Sarah Rose based on the timing and location of the adoption. The next phase of the investigation would involve very careful research into these potential matches to determine which one was Diana's daughter. Morrison's investigation had narrowed down to 3 women who could potentially be Sarah Rose. Each had been adopted as a newborn in the correct time frame and geographical area, and each had been placed with families that matched Diana's written hopes for her daughter's future. Catherine and William met with Morrison in a secure room at Kensington Palace to review the files he had compiled. The first candidate was Sarah Mitchell, now 26 years old, living in Edinburgh with her husband and 2 young children. She worked as a pediatric nurse and was known in her community for organizing charity drives for disadvantaged families. Her adoptive parents, both university professors, had raised her with strong values and excellent education. Sarah Mitchell had never attempted to contact her birth family, seeming content with her life as it was. Morrison had managed to obtain a recent photograph of Sarah Mitchell through public social media posts. When Catherine saw the image, she gasped audibly. The resemblance to Diana was unmistakable, particularly around the eyes and the gentle smile. Sarah Mitchell had the same blonde hair, though styled differently, and the same graceful posture that Diana had been known for. The second candidate was Rose Williams, 26, living in Bath and working as an art therapist with children who had experienced trauma. She had been adopted by a family involved in social work, which might explain her career choice. Rose had actively searched for her birth family several years earlier, but had been unsuccessful due to sealed records. She was unmarried but in a long-term relationship with a musician. Rose Williams bore a different kind of resemblance to Diana, more in her bone structure and the way she moved. Based on video footage Morrison had managed to obtain from a public lecture she had given about art therapy. Her hair was darker, but her facial features showed distinct Spencer family characteristics, particularly the strong jawline and expressive eyes. The third candidate was Sarah Rose Thompson, who had kept both the names Diana had given her. She was living in London, working as a journalist specializing in humanitarian issues. Her adoptive family had been involved in international aid work, which might have influenced her career path. Sarah Rose Thompson was known for her investigative pieces about social justice and had won several awards for her reporting on refugee issues. What struck both Catherine and William immediately about Sarah Rose Thompson was not just her physical resemblance to Diana, but her choice of career and the passion she brought to helping others. Morrison had collected several of her published articles, and reading them felt like hearing Diana's voice speaking through someone else's words. The compassion, the determination to give voice to the voiceless, and the refusal to accept injustice were all traits that Diana had possessed. Morrison explained that his next step would be to discreetly obtain DNA samples from each candidate to compare with the genetic material they had from Diana. This would require careful planning to avoid arousing suspicion or violating anyone's privacy. He suggested attending public events where the candidates might be present, hoping to collect DNA from discarded items like coffee cups or napkins. Catherine felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were attempting. These were real people with real lives, and somewhere among them was William's sister, living without any knowledge of her true heritage. The thought that they might be able to reunite Diana's children filled her with hope, but she also worried about the disruption this revelation could cause in Sarah Rose's life. William studied the photographs and files intently, trying to imagine growing up with a sister, wondering how different his childhood might have been if the family had remained together. He thought about Diana's loneliness during her marriage to his father, and how different things might have been if she had been able to keep her first daughter and not feel so isolated within the royal family. The investigation had also revealed additional details about the adoption process that painted a clearer picture of Diana's emotional state during that time. The adoption agency's records showed that Diana had insisted on choosing the family herself, spending weeks reviewing profiles to find parents who shared her values and would provide the kind of loving home she wanted for her daughter. Eleanor Hartwell provided more context about Diana's behavior during the months following the adoption. She had been listless and sad, often staring at babies and young children during public appearances with a wistful expression that the media had interpreted as natural maternal instinct, not knowing it was grief for the child she had given up. Catherine found herself becoming particularly drawn to the possibility that Sarah Rose Thompson might be Diana's daughter. The woman's career in journalism, focusing on humanitarian issues, seemed like such a natural extension of Diana's own passions. She had written articles about homeless youth, refugee children, and families separated by conflict, all causes that Diana had championed during her public life. Morrison warned them that they needed to prepare for the possibility that none of these three women would prove to be Diana's daughter. Adoption records from that era were sometimes incomplete or inaccurate, and there was always the chance that Sarah Rose had been adopted under circumstances that left fewer traces. He also reminded them that even when they identified the correct person, approaching her with this information would require extreme sensitivity. As they concluded their meeting with Morrison, Catherine and William both felt the weight of being so close to potentially life-changing discovery. Within weeks, they might know the identity of Diana's daughter, and shortly after that, they would face the challenge of deciding how and when to make contact with her. The thought of finally bringing Diana's children together after more than 2 decades of separation was both thrilling and terrifying. 3 weeks of careful surveillance and discreet sample collection had passed when Morrison finally called with the DNA results that would change everything. Catherine and William rushed to meet him at a private office in central London, away from the palace where curious staff might overhear their conversation. Both were nervous, knowing that this moment would either confirm their hopes or send them back to searching. Morrison's expression was serious as he spread the laboratory reports across the conference table. "The results are conclusive," he began, his voice measured and professional. "Sarah Rose Thompson is definitely Diana's biological daughter. The DNA match is unmistakable, showing clear maternal lineage with markers that could only come from Diana herself." Catherine felt her knees go weak with relief and excitement. William stared at the scientific data as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. After weeks of speculation and hope, they finally had proof that Diana's daughter was alive and living just across London from them. "Tell us everything you've learned about her," William said, his voice thick with emotion. Morrison opened a comprehensive file that contained details about Sarah Rose Thompson's life, from her childhood through her current circumstances. Sarah Rose had grown up in a loving family in Surrey. Her adoptive parents, Margaret and David Thompson, were both educators who had been unable to have biological children. They had told Sarah Rose from an early age that she was adopted, always emphasizing how much they had wanted her and how special she was to them. The Thompsons had provided her with an excellent education and had encouraged her natural curiosity about the world. During her university years at Oxford, Sarah Rose had studied journalism and international relations, showing particular interest in conflict resolution and humanitarian aid. Her dissertation had focused on the media's role in bringing attention to humanitarian crises, a topic that would have made Diana immensely proud. Morrison had discovered that Sarah Rose had attempted to trace her biological family several times over the years, but had always been blocked by the sealed adoption records and the special privacy measures that had been put in place due to the sensitive nature of her birth circumstances. She had no idea that her birth mother was Princess Diana. The investigator had also learned that Sarah Rose had never married, though she had been in a serious relationship for several years with Dr. Michael Chen, a physician who worked with Doctors Without Borders. Their relationship seemed to be built on shared values, about helping others and making a positive impact in the world. What struck Catherine most powerfully was learning about Sarah Rose's personality and character. Colleagues described her as compassionate, determined, and fearless in pursuing stories that might help vulnerable people. She had traveled to war zones to report on refugee situations, had investigated corruption in charities, and had written extensively about the importance of mental health support for trauma survivors. "She's so much like Diana," Catherine whispered, reading through quotes from Sarah Rose's articles and interviews. "The same passion for justice, the same refusal to look away from suffering, the same belief that publicity can be used as a force for good." William was studying recent photographs of his sister, seeing Diana's features clearly reflected in the young woman's face. Sarah Rose had inherited Diana's expressive blue eyes, her gentle smile, and her graceful bearing. But there was also something uniquely her own about her appearance, a strength and independence that spoke to the life she had built for herself. Morrison explained that Sarah Rose currently lived in a flat in Notting Hill, not far from where Diana had lived before her marriage. She worked for an independent journalism organization that specialized in investigative reporting on social issues. Her most recent series had exposed problems in the foster care system, showing the same determination to protect vulnerable children that Diana had displayed throughout her public life. The revelation that Sarah Rose lived so close to Kensington Palace felt almost surreal to Catherine and William. They had been searching for her across the country when she had been living just minutes away from them all along. William wondered if they had ever passed each other on the street, if he had unknowingly been in the same shops or restaurants as his sister. Morrison also provided details about Sarah Rose's adoptive family. Margaret and David Thompson were now in their 70s, retired but still active in their community. They had clearly done an excellent job raising Sarah Rose, instilling in her the values and confidence that had shaped her into the remarkable woman she had become. Morrison emphasized how important it would be to approach this situation with sensitivity toward the Thompson family as well. "What's our next step?" Catherine asked, feeling both excited and overwhelmed by the prospect of making contact with Sarah Rose. "How do we approach someone whose entire understanding of her identity is about to change?" Morrison recommended a gradual approach, possibly beginning with an intermediary who could gauge Sarah Rose's interest in learning about her biological family before revealing the full truth about her heritage. He also suggested consulting with psychological professionals who specialized in adoption reunions to ensure they handled the situation in a way that would be least traumatic for everyone involved. William was quiet for a long time, processing the reality that he was about to meet the sister he had never known he had. He thought about all the family moments Sarah Rose had missed, all the times Diana might have thought about her daughter during public appearances or private family gatherings. He also thought about how this revelation would complete a piece of Diana's story that had been missing for so long. As they prepared to leave the meeting, Catherine felt a profound sense of responsibility settling over her. They were no longer just searching for someone. They were preparing to change the life of a woman who had built her own identity and success without knowing her true background. The weight of Diana's secret was about to become Sarah Rose's reality, and they needed to ensure that this reunion honored both Diana's memory and Sarah Rose's right to choose how much of this new reality she wanted to embrace. Catherine's hands trembled as she dialed the number Morrison had provided for Sarah Rose Thompson. They had decided that Catherine would make the initial contact, believing that a woman's voice might seem less threatening than William's, and that Catherine's genuine emotional connection to Diana would come through in their conversation. She had practiced what to say dozens of times, but her heart was still racing as she waited for someone to answer. "Hello," Sarah Rose Thompson speaking, came a warm, clear voice that immediately reminded Catherine of Diana's telephone manner. The similarity was so striking that Catherine nearly forgot her carefully rehearsed opening words. "Hello, Ms. Thompson. My name is Catherine, and I'm calling about a very personal matter regarding your family history. I know this might sound unusual, but I have some information about your biological parents that I believe you would want to know. Would you be willing to meet with me to discuss this?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Catherine could hear Sarah Rose's breathing, and she imagined the young woman trying to process this unexpected call. Finally, Sarah Rose spoke, her voice cautious but interested. "I've been trying to learn about my biological family for years, but the adoption records were sealed. What kind of information do you have? And how did you get my number?" Catherine had prepared for these questions, but she found herself struggling to maintain the careful balance between revealing enough to secure a meeting while not overwhelming Sarah Rose with information over the phone. "I have documents and photographs that I believe belong to you by right. What I need to share with you is quite sensitive, and I think it would be better discussed in person. Would you be comfortable meeting somewhere public, perhaps for coffee?" Sarah Rose agreed to meet the following afternoon at a quiet cafe in Covent Garden, away from both her office and her home. Catherine hung up the phone feeling both relief and terror. In less than 24 hours, she would be sitting across from Diana's daughter, about to reveal a secret that would change the young woman's understanding of her entire life. William wanted to attend the meeting, but they had decided that introducing the concept gradually would be less overwhelming for Sarah Rose. Catherine would meet with her first, gauge her reaction to learning about Diana, and then arrange for William to be introduced as her biological brother once Sarah Rose had time to process the initial revelation. The next day, Catherine arrived at the cafe 30 minutes early, choosing a corner table where they could talk privately. She carried with her a leather portfolio containing copies of Diana's diary entries, the hospital photographs, and the DNA test results. Her heart pounded as she watched each person who entered the cafe, wondering if this would be the moment she finally met Diana's daughter. When Sarah Rose arrived, Catherine recognized her immediately despite having only seen photographs. She was more beautiful in person, with an inner light that reminded Catherine powerfully of Diana during her happiest moments. Sarah Rose looked around the cafe uncertainly before Catherine waved her over to the corner table. "Catherine," Sarah Rose asked as she approached. "Thank you for agreeing to meet somewhere neutral. I have to admit I'm incredibly curious about what you have to tell me." As Sarah Rose settled into her chair, Catherine was struck by her poise and confidence. This was clearly a woman who was comfortable with herself and her place in the world, which made what Catherine was about to reveal both easier and more difficult. Sarah Rose had built a successful life without knowing her true heritage, and Catherine was about to potentially upend that stability. "Before I begin," Catherine said carefully, "I want you to know that everything I'm about to tell you has been verified through DNA testing and historical records. I also want you to know that learning this information is entirely your choice. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or want to stop, we can end this conversation." Sarah Rose nodded, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged. "I appreciate that. I've been searching for information about my biological parents for years, so I'm prepared for whatever you have to tell me." Catherine opened the portfolio and withdrew one of the hospital photographs, placing it face down on the table between them. "Your birth mother was someone who lived very much in the public eye, which is why your adoption was handled with such secrecy. She was very young when she had you, and giving you up was one of the most difficult decisions she ever made." She turned over the photograph, watching Sarah Rose's face carefully as the young woman saw the image of Diana holding her as a newborn. Sarah Rose stared at the photograph for a long moment, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to absolute shock. "That's Princess Diana," Sarah Rose whispered, her voice barely audible. "But that can't be. I mean, this is impossible." Catherine reached across the table and gently touched Sarah Rose's hand. "Your birth mother was Diana, Princess of Wales. You are her daughter, born before her marriage to Prince Charles. Your biological brother is Prince William." Sarah Rose continued staring at the photograph, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Catherine could see her trying to process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about herself. The cafe continued buzzing with activity around them, but their corner felt suspended in time as the weight of this revelation settled between them. "I need to see more proof," Sarah Rose said finally, her journalist's training helping her focus despite the emotional impact. "This is the kind of claim that requires extraordinary evidence." Catherine spent the next hour showing Sarah Rose the diary entries, the DNA test results, and additional photographs. With each piece of evidence, she watched the young woman's disbelief transform into acceptance, and then into a profound sense of connection to a mother she had never known, but whose values and passions she had somehow inherited. "She wrote about me," Sarah Rose said softly, reading Diana's diary entries about her hopes and dreams for her daughter's future. "She really loved me, even though she had to give me up." Catherine felt tears in her own eyes as she watched Sarah Rose connect with Diana's memory through the written words and photographs. "She never stopped thinking about you. And now, if you're willing, William would very much like to meet his sister." 2 days after her meeting with Catherine, Sarah Rose found herself standing at the gates of Kensington Palace, still struggling to believe that this was really happening. She had spent the previous 48 hours in a whirlwind of emotions, calling in sick to work and barely sleeping as she processed the earth-shattering news about her true identity. The woman she had admired from afar her entire life, whose charitable work had inspired her own career choices, was actually her biological mother. Catherine met her at a private entrance, embracing her warmly before leading her through corridors lined with portraits of royal family members who were now, incredibly, her blood relatives. Sarah Rose felt overwhelmed by the grandeur of the palace, but also by a strange sense of familiarity, as if some part of her had always known she belonged in these spaces where Diana had once walked. William was waiting in the same private sitting room where Catherine had first shared the DNA results with him. When Sarah Rose entered, both siblings stopped and stared at each other, seeing their mother's features reflected in each other's faces. The resemblance was unmistakable, not just in their physical appearance but in their bearing and the way they moved. "Sarah Rose," William said softly, stepping forward with tears in his eyes. "I can't believe you're really here. I can't believe I have a sister." The meeting that followed was emotional and tentative at first as both siblings struggled to navigate this unprecedented situation. William shared memories of Diana, stories that Sarah Rose had never heard but that helped her understand the woman who had given birth to her. He told her about Diana's love for children, her rebellious spirit within the constraints of royal protocol, and her determination to use her position to help others. Sarah Rose, in turn, shared details about her adoptive family and the life she had built for herself. William was amazed to learn about her career in journalism and her focus on humanitarian issues, seeing clear echoes of Diana's passions in the work his sister had chosen. They discovered that they had both inherited Diana's tendency to challenge authority when it conflicted with their principles, and her inability to ignore suffering when they encountered it. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine watched the two siblings begin to form a genuine connection. They shared the same dry sense of humor, the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking, and the same fierce loyalty to the people they cared about. It was as if the years of separation were dissolving as they recognized the family bonds that had always existed beneath the surface. William showed Sarah Rose through parts of the palace where Diana had lived, including her former bedroom and the garden where she used to walk when she needed to think. Sarah Rose was particularly moved when William brought out some of Diana's personal belongings that had been carefully preserved, including jewelry and clothing that now rightfully belonged to her as well. The conversation eventually turned to the practical implications of this revelation. Sarah Rose would now need to decide how much of her newfound royal heritage she wanted to embrace, and how much of her previous life she wanted to maintain. William assured her that there was no pressure to take on any official royal duties, but that she would always be welcome as part of the family. Sarah Rose expressed concern about her adoptive parents, the Thompsons, who had given her a loving home and excellent upbringing. William immediately suggested that they should be honored and included in any family gatherings, emphasizing that gaining biological siblings didn't diminish the importance of the family who had raised her. As evening approached, Sarah Rose made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She asked if she could visit Diana's grave at Althorpe, feeling a desperate need to connect with the mother she had never known but whose love she could feel through the diary entries and photographs. William immediately agreed to arrange the visit, understanding his sister's need for closure and connection. The three of them spent the rest of the evening looking through more of Diana's personal effects and sharing stories. Catherine was deeply moved watching William and Sarah Rose discover their similarities and begin to build the sibling relationship that Diana would have wanted them to have. She could almost feel Diana's presence in the room, as if the princess was finally at peace knowing that her children had found each other. When it came time for Sarah Rose to leave, William walked her to the palace entrance, both reluctant to end this miraculous day. They made plans to meet again soon, and William promised to introduce her to Harry and their father Charles when she felt ready for those meetings. As Sarah Rose walked away from Kensington Palace that evening, she felt as though her entire understanding of herself had been transformed. She was no longer just Sarah Rose Thompson, the adopted journalist with a passion for humanitarian causes. She was also Princess Diana's daughter, sister to the future King of England, and part of a family legacy that stretched back centuries, but perhaps most importantly, she finally understood why she had always felt drawn to helping others, why she had chosen a career that echoed Diana's charitable work, and why she had always felt a deep connection to the princess whose life had ended too soon. The values and passions she had thought were entirely her own were actually part of a family inheritance that had been passed down through blood and spirit. Catherine, Watching from a palace window as Sarah Rose disappeared into the London evening, felt a profound sense of completion. Diana's greatest secret had finally been revealed. Her children were reunited, and the princess's legacy of love and service would continue through the daughters she had been forced to give up, but had never stopped loving. The DNA test that had started this journey had given them all much more than scientific proof. It had restored a family that had been incomplete for far too long.